We've got a wonderful, wonderful panel. We've got 4 incredible people with us. So as I invite them on stage, please, please, please join me in giving them a big round of applause. First, we have Dr. Anjan Chatterjee. Everybody's already heard him. Professor Chatterjee, please come on stage. He's the Professor of Neurology, Psychology, Architecture at University of Pennsylvania. He's the founding director of Penn's Center of Neuroaesthetics. And he's studying what happens when brain encounters beauty. There's a lot more that I can introduce him with, but I think everybody's already spoken to him and heard about him. So once again, big round of applause for Dr. Chatterjee. Joining him again from the neuroscience background, research background, is Dr. Nandini Chatterjee Singh, who's a cognitive neuroscientist. She's now at Ashoka University, and her work spans music, emotion, and how it works in your brain. Now, for me, who's not from a scientific background, both Dr. Chatterjee and Dr. Nandini's work was so interesting, and I want to know all about it. So please help me in welcoming Dr. Nandini, please. And joining them on stage, we have Sanjana Edwankar. Sanjana is the Community Outreach Manager of ERISA. She's a trained counselor. She's got a background in applied theater. She works with adolescents in marginalized communities in programs of ERISA, and she's got a lot of background before that earlier as well. So joining Sanjana, our last panelist for today, is Sudarshan Chakhale. Sudarshan is the founder of Jyotiba Savitri Foundation, and they do incredible work with nomadic, denotified, marginalized communities. Under his leadership, 260 children who were on the traffic lights begging have been admitted into school, and his story is incredible. The stories of kids that he works with, the communities that he works with are incredible. Please give him a round of applause and help me welcome the entire panel for today. When was the last time that everyone here participated in some kind of an artistic activity? If it was today, raise your hand. Some kind of an artistic activity. It could be anything. You can define art the way you'd like. Okay. I saw many of you dancing when Rukmini Aka was asking you to. So that's art of some kind. Yes. How about, keep your hands up. How about if it was in the last 1 week? Okay. I see some more hands up. How about if it was in the last 1 month? Okay, I see most of your hands are up, which means to all the panelists, we've got an interesting audience that side of the panel as well, who in their own ways are trying to see how even in difficult times they observe well-being, they practice art, and what we will touch on is how does this connect from the research background that we have on that side of the panel to the in-person, on-ground experience that is on this side of the panel, and how for everyone here you can think of how does that relate to your own experiences day to day. So पहिले मी सुदर्शन तुमच्यासोबत सुरू करतो. तुम्ही तुमच्या मुलांसोबत काम करता, ते डिफिकल्ट सिच्युएशन्समध्ये असतात, तरी असं तुम्हाला दिसतं का की ते समहाव फाइंड अ वे, ते कधी कुठे ना कुठे ते आर्टला किंवा गाण्याला किंवा अजून काही ह्याला ते होल्ड ऑन करून ठेवतात, म्हणजे ते आर्ट, म्युझिक और एनी ऑफ दोज इवन इन दॅट डिफिकल्ट सिच्युएशन, त्या डिफिकल्ट सिच्युएशनमध्ये पण ते त्याला शोधतात आणि त्याला पकडून ठेवतात. असं तुम्हाला ऑब्झर्व होतं का जेव्हा तुम्ही तुमच्या मुलांसोबत काम करता? सुरे.
मराठीत बोलतो मी. ज्या मुलांसोबत म्हणजे काम करतोय ती मुळात ज्यांचा भाकरीचाच प्रश्न अजून सुटलेला नाही आहे. आणि दुसरी गोष्ट तुम्ही जे विचारलं की ते त्यांचा म्हणजे आनंद शोधतात का, तर ते प्रत्येक गोष्टीत आनंद शोधतात. आणि म्हणजे उदाहरणार्थ खेळण्यात आनंद शोधत आहेत किंवा कुणीतरी गाणं गुणगुणतं आहे त्याच्यात आनंद शोधत आहेत. तर ही सगळी जी मुलं आहेत ही सिग्नलला भीक मागणारी मुलं, म्हणजे कुणी खेळणी विकतं आहे, कुणी फुलं विकतं आहे किंवा, आणि त्यांचा आनंद काय आहे तर काहीतरी नवीन वडापाव मिळाला आहे मला, याच्यात त्यांचा तो एक हॅपीनेस आपण ज्याला म्हणतो त्याचा तो आनंद आहे. कधी भावरा खेळताना तो आनंद आहे. त्यांच्या जगण्यात ते आनंद शोधतात, फक्त ते दुःखाचं भांडवल करत नाही. म्हणजे जगातलं सगळं दुःख मलाच आहे अशा पद्धतीचं ते मला कधी जाणवलं नाही. म्हणजे त्यांच्या सिग्नलवरती फुलं विकताना पण ते आनंदी असतात, ते टेन्शन नसतात असं दिसतंय सगळं, नाही का. आणि ती जी मुलं ही पारधी कम्युनिटीतली येतात. आता त्यांचं फक्त एक बेसिक सांगतो. आता तुम्हाला सगळ्यांनाच बघून माझाच कॉन्फिडन्स डाऊन झाला आहे, कारण एवढ्या मोठ्या स्टेजवरती मी कधी गेलेलो नाही. तर आपली जी गव्हर्मेंट काय सांगत आहे की मुलगा जर का शाळेत पाहिजे असेल तर त्याचा जन्म दाखला मागते, आणि ज्याचा मुळात घरात जन्म झालेला आहे तो शाळेत नाही जाऊ शकत, म्हणजे तो ऑनलाईन दिसणार नाही. तर पूर्वी आम्ही 3 वर्षापूर्वी तर दातावरनं जन्म दाखला काढला जायचा, त्याला ए सर्टिफिकेट म्हणतात. ससूनला दातावरनं जन्म दाखला काढला जातो. त्या दाताची चेकिंग होती, बॉडीची तपासणी होती आणि त्याच्यावरनं जन्म दाखला काढला जातो. त्याला प्रशासकीय भाषेत ए सर्टिफिकेट म्हणतात. असे 40 मुलांचे ए सर्टिफिकेट आम्ही काढले, आणि त्या 40 मुलांचे ए सर्टिफिकेट काढल्यानंतर त्याच्यावरती आम्ही आधार कार्ड काढले, आणि आधार कार्ड काढल्यानंतर शाळेत त्यांना टाकलं. आता ती 40 मुलं सिग्नलला भीक मागत नाही. पांगारी नावाचं गाव आहे भोरमध्ये, तिथल्या हॉस्टेलमध्ये ते शिकत आहे. ते सिग्नलला भीक मागत नाही. आणि आत्ता थोडंसं उलटं झालेलं आहे की आत्ता असं झालेलं आहे की इथली जी शासन व्यवस्था आहे, म्हणजे सरकारी जी यंत्रणा आहे ती असं म्हणत आहे की तुम्ही जन्म दाखला द्या, आणि जन्म दाखला दिला तर त्याच्यावरती QR कोड पाहिजे. आता ज्याचा मुळात घरात जन्म झालेला आहे तर तो QR कोड आणू शकत नाही ना, आणि जन्म दाखलाच आणू शकत नाही तर QR कोड आणण्याचा प्रश्नच नाही. त्याच्यामुळं ती शाळेपासून ती वंचित राहतात. पण शेवटचा मुद्दा असा आहे की इतकं सगळं त्यांना वाटत आहे की मलाही शाळेत जायचं आहे, आमचा शेजारचा मुलगा शाळेत जातो आहे, त्याला स्कूल बस आहे, त्याला छान कपडे आहे, त्याला त्याचे आईवडील त्याची काळजी घेणारे आहेत, जो शेजारी बघतो बिल्डिंगचं कल्चर. तर तसं माझ्या आईबापांनी केलं पाहिजे असं त्याला जरी वाटत असलं तरी तो त्याचं दुःख करून घेत नाही, तो कुठंतरी त्याचा आनंद शोधतो.
Incredible. Yes. For those of you who probably don't understand Marathi as well, I will do a really bad job in trying to translate. But what Sudarshan here was saying is, in his experience of working with these children who are on the street lights begging, what he sees is, even though there's a lot of hardships that they face, they still find space for joy. Now, a small little toy that they make themselves or they see can give them a lot of joy. Very rarely will you see these kids wallowing in self-pity. Very rarely will you see them complaining all the time. And he sees that there is this space for well-being on its own terms in these kids as well. He also mentioned about how systemic issues persist and other challenges persist for all of these kids. This part I want to come to a little later because I think it's very important. But for the earlier, Sanjana, you worked with Arisa even earlier on the field with different people. Is there resonance of this experience with you? You've worked with people who are in very difficult circumstances. Do you also see the same sense of, oh, they find something to hold on to?
Definitely. I think I completely agree with what Sudarshan said. There is definitely so much resilience in these kids. I have worked in public schools, and we would get to know the kids little by little, as much like, as they would start opening up to us. And at some points we would be so surprised about the amount of things that are going in their life, and they would be so resilient. They would still try to play in school. Their motivation was that if I come to school, I will meet my friends and I get to play with them. So I think it is the connection, joy, they kind of made spaces and pockets of joy for themselves where they know that they can be free. Because going back home, there are going to be times where they won't be allowed to do that. So for example, for many girls, they might need to do chores, or they are not even sure if they are going to be able to complete their 10th standard. But when they come to school and then there is a PT period, or they can play volleyball, or they can do some art, or even like, just for the joy of it, put mehendi on each other's hands, they take that opportunity because at some point there is this realization that maybe I don't get to do that later on, so I don't want to miss this opportunity. And obviously there are like a lot of different factors on how much opportunities they take and all the other factors, but it is incredible to see that they do end up finding joy in spaces where we might be very stunned, or like at least I know personally I have been very stunned on how do you even manage that. And art has definitely played a role in that. Like again, it could be mehendi, it could be rangoli, it could be some creative game that they have kind of come up with. Like for a lot of us, we also remember like in schools we would kind of make songs and like movements and play with that. So they would do things like that when we were working on like visual like drawing and stuff like that. A lot of boys would kind of make DJ and like all those aspirational dreams that they have, and they would love to make DJ or like India ka Jhanda and stuff like that. So I feel like they have somewhere found something to cling on to. How that affects them is a future question, because like everything that they cling on to, sometimes there is a high chance that they can be manipulated or something on those lines. But yeah, there are things that they cling on to.
Very interesting. Now, this is a question for the researchers, for the scientists on our panel. This is quite interesting in that even in difficult times, whether it's children or adults, art shows up. Whether it's mehendi that somebody draws, whether it is music, folk music that everybody attaches themselves to, art shows up. And sometimes we tend to believe art is in museums, art is in like these, it's a luxury belief that once your basic needs are met, then you can experience and appreciate. But from research, and this is open to both of you, do you see this happening again and again? And how does research explain this? Does art show up, or is this something that people go to after their basic needs are met?
So this idea of, is art nice to have or is art a need to have, right? This is a key question. And I think there are some cultural biases around this. So I would say in America, there's a broad view that art is frivolous. It's for the wealthy, it's for the bougie, and all of that. And there's also a competing ethos that technology is going to solve our problems. So we should invest in technology and technological innovation and not art, right? There's this sort of contrast made. Having said that, we do find, so you mentioned about art sequestered in these temples, right? These elitist temples, and often there's a kind of a cultural gap that some people feel alienated before they've even looked at the art, because if you are in Philadelphia, you have to climb up these big stairs that Rocky ran down, if any of you know those, that movie. But it's even the physical act of ascending is sort of telling you it's up there, it belongs in the heavens. On the other side of that is, I don't know if I mentioned this, but Philadelphia has the largest collection of public art in America. There are between 4,000 and 5,000 public murals that are in every section of town, whether it's poor, whether it's rich, whatever the ethnicity, it's there. And that was a movement that began in the 1970s when Philadelphia had a lot of gangs and a lot of graffiti and a lot of vandalism. And those same people were co-opted into saying, like, you've got talent, and let's beautify the city with this. And for the last 45 years, it's been incredibly successful. So I think there is a way in which, when given the vehicle, given the setting, that people will be drawn to this and drawn to express whatever pain, even that cathartic sense of being able to express their anger, which was happening in the graffiti, now is done in conversation with the community. And, you know, I don't want to take up more time, but I can come back later if the conversation goes there with, actually this very week we're writing a grant around this for people who are unhoused on the streets and opioid addicts as another population for whom art might be very useful.
Thank you. So my take on this is a little simplistic. Okay? I want to talk of art as a producer of art, not a consumer of art. Okay? And that's what you've been referring to. And if you look at why one gets anxious or leads to states of poor mental health, it's often because the mind wanders. Okay? But when you perform art, it's sensory motor in nature. Almost every kind of art, it requires you to engage your senses and often motor activity too. That forces areas of the brain that are maybe ruminating to take away oxygen or glucose from these areas and move them away to areas that are participating in the activity. And thereby, the sheer nature of art, because everything that we do is directed by the brain, even though it's embodied, it emerges from the body, the signals come from the brain, the direction comes from the brain. So you're forced to move that consumption of oxygen and glucose away from areas that make you anxious or worried to areas that are participating in the activity. And thereby, you lose your anxiety and come back to feeling better. And what we do know is art is able to engage networks of the brain besides sensory motor to even what we now know as reward networks and motivational networks. So it's almost as if it lies within us, and by allowing ourselves to be rooted in our bodies and in the present, we possess skills of bringing back things to ourselves. Okay? And I think therefore art is within us and we just have to allow ourselves to demonstrate it. And just before I hand the mic back to you, I just want to draw attention to a point that he mentioned in the beginning, that the children often want to go to schools, and despite the fact that they come from such underpowerished and undernourished places, one of the things over the years we have learned about the brain is, above hunger and thirst is the need to socially connect. If you see the amount of brain tissue that is allocated to social processing, which in turn is also linked to emotional processing, it's scary, which is why loneliness is such a big epidemic. Okay? So that's the question. How do you have to find ways to socially connect, because that's the way to reward yourself. And I think the most important thing I want you to take away from this discussion is well-being today we know is a skill. It's not an accident or something that happens by the way. If we are just able to find enough time to pause and think about what makes you feel good, you have found the secret to life. And you will persist and be resilient whatever happens.
Wonderful. There's so many things there that I wanted to double click on. One is for everyone in the audience, I hope like me, you're starting to think of, oh, okay, there's the resource, there's the actualization on ground. How does this connect to what I can do? Because that's how all of this is talk. But when the talk can also go into something from your life, then that can be interesting. One thing that you said, which was very interesting, was art as the producer, like you produce art and that makes you do things. There's also the other side, which is as the consumer of art, and how does that affect you? Now, Dr. Anjan, you also spoke about how the gangsters or criminals on the street used to use art to express what they were feeling. then they were in a way used to denote something. I'm curious about how you think of the effect that art has. Is it all positive? We've said art is great, art does all of this, but is it all positive?
That question was a setup because I am not somebody who believes that art is an unmitigated good. I think art is a very powerful tool, and like any tool, it can be used in a variety of ways. It can be used for propaganda, it can be used for manipulation, it can be used to change a narrative in a way that there's always an intention behind it, and the intention itself can be good or bad or manipulative. And to just give, if I can give the one example, so I live in Philadelphia, and Philadelphia in 1776 is where all the independence movement happened and the Declaration of Independence. By Independence Hall, which is a few blocks from where I live and a few blocks from where Kohinoor lived when she was in Philadelphia, is the original house of George Washington, the first president in America. And it was unearthed, and you can see the foundation, and a bunch of artists and historians created a whole exhibit around this, about that time. And in particular, one big part of that was George Washington's relationship to slavery, that he had 8 slaves, that they were all named. And at the time, there was a rule in Pennsylvania, if a black person was in Pennsylvania for more than 6 months, they were free, because the northern states didn't have slavery. So he would send his slaves back to Virginia just shy of 6 months, right? So they wouldn't meet that criteria, and then recycle them. So this is a fact. People are complicated. George Washington was an amazing person in other ways, but this is a fact. And this was the location, right? Place matters, right? This is where it was happening. And so our current administration decided that this is not the history we want people to know. And so they came and removed all of those plaques, so that as though this history never happened. And so this is a way in which art can be used as revelation, right? We put this man up on a pedestal, and as he should, but everybody has their foibles, and this was a big one. And then you have an administration saying, no, we don't want that version of art. We want something else that is really a kind of Disneyfied version of what America is. So my only point is art can be used in many ways.
Sanjana, I remember you had told me about how, as you're working with kids who come from difficult backgrounds, even using the art therapies that you use is fraught with challenges, because you can do that in that limited space, but how it appears for them afterwards is a challenge. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, and then we can go to others as well.
Sure. So, I'm not an art therapist, but I do use art and other experiential activities as a part of group practice or individual practice. And the groups that I have worked with, even in Arisa, when we work with rural kids or when we work with other schools, what we realized was, while we were trying to help them, or we were trying to give them alternate coping mechanisms that we thought were healthy, it didn't align with the kind of realities that they lived with. So yes, like there are certain ways that art can be used to process emotions, and that is definitely helpful. But we were with them for maybe like 1 hour a week, and after that they have to go back to a reality where none of these things exist, or they exist in a very different way. And for us to then expect that they use these techniques in a reality which is so far removed from what we are trying to do is not only inappropriate, but also could be unsafe. Because if we try to tell them like, oh, be non-violent, but they live in a very violent community, like reality is very different from what we would ideally like there to be. So it was also a question of like, in every community, like, and every community has its own lived reality. So everywhere we kind of had to be like, okay, yeah, we are coming with this plan, but this plan is not working, and we have to be flexible enough to like, change it. And I think we took like a very long time to just understand what is happening. And again, that reality itself is dynamic. So yeah, a lot of time it happens that the kind of support we want to give, and even if the children want that support, till the communities that they live in also can't reinforce that support, I won't say it is in vain, but it does not work the way that we would like it to work. So the best thing that, at least from my opinion, is that we not only work with the kids, but we then work with the school ecosystem, but then we work with the community so that everyone kind of reinforces. And in all of that, there also needs to be government support to accessibility to these things, right? Because we need funding for these things. We need so much of social acceptance for these things to happen. So we try to work with, okay, yeah, let's work with kids on mental health, but just trying to look at that one problem, we realize that all of these problems are so connected. Until these problems are not addressed, we can't work on this one thing in an isolated way. It might work to a certain degree, but it will not work the way we would like, or the way it might be healthy enough for the kids to be.
Right. So, Dr. Nandini, you have worked on the policy side of the table as well. You worked on the UNESCO table as well. I am curious what are the discussions on those tables like when you're looking at policy for well-being, policy for inculcating art? How does that discussion happen? And what is the line between the discussion there and what happens on the ground?
So I'm afraid the gap is huge. Okay? And we have not been able to emphasize enough the relevance and importance of the scientific basis for advocating a policy change. Okay? And I'm afraid to a large extent policy still remains very personal and anecdotal in terms of its implementation. There is an attempt being made at many fronts to bring the science, and a science that is replicable, so that it's just not a one-off therapy that has worked, but something that has been adapted and contextualized, but the fundamental science remains the same, and that has worked. So for instance, we now know there are a number of practices that we have to teach children in terms of helping them overcome anxiety or any kind of loss or worry or concern or loneliness. Okay? What exactly those practices are? A very simple example being much discussed, mindfulness. Okay? And if you Google, you will find at least 1,000 studies on mindfulness, out of which maybe only a percentage of them have worked. Okay? And there will be a number of them that will show that there was no change that was seen. So what does the policymaker do? What is the policymaker supposed to buy in such a situation? And that's what the policymaker comes back to ask scientists. So you decide there are 50% of them that work and 50% of them that don't. And that's where the role of the scientist becomes important, is to say, under what context, what idea of mindfulness or a particular scientific theory was implemented. So if the fundamental takeaway is, as Dr. Chatterjee started his talk with, instead of rushing around and putting your brain in a tizzy, if you understand what the biological mechanism is, the first thing you want to get people to do is pause. Okay, so the fundamental takeaway is pause and living in the present. Can I design practices in different cultural settings that get people to pause, engage with sensory motor function, and live in the present, rather than taking a practice that was done in place A and doing it in all 25 places. So taking the essence of what is it that worked in becoming a successful therapy, taking that and making sure it's adapted or implemented in the right cultural context is critical. Arriving at that is where the biggest gap is. Right. Okay, and that's That's not easy to do. It's a huge challenge. There's also a big gap among scientists themselves to agree on what are some fundamental practices that we want to promote and advocate in terms of improvement. So it's a very, very tough and uphill battle. Very slow steps that are beginning to happen. I think the important thing now is at least policymakers recognize that well-being is something they need to attend to from the school and the university setting.
The gap is wide, and I want to see from the other side of the gap. Sudarshan, आता पॉलिसीबद्दल थोडं डिस्कशनमध्ये डॉक्टर नंदिनींनी म्हटलं की खूप जास्त गॅप आहे ते पॉलिसीमध्ये जे डिस्कस करतात आणि ऑन फील्ड जे आहे हे तर तुम्ही एक्सपिरियन्स केलं असेल. तुम्ही जेव्हा मुलांशी बोलता, तुम्ही जेव्हा तुमच्या कम्युनिटीमध्ये जाऊन मदत करायचा प्रयत्न करता, तर काय प्रॉब्लेम्स येतात? आणि असं वाटतं का की गव्हर्मेंटकडनं, सिस्टीमकडनं एक फ्रेमवर्क आहे जे मे बी पोहोचत नाही आहे, की असं वाटतं की फ्रेमवर्कच नाही आहे? तर तुमच्याकडनं, या मुलांकडनं या पूर्ण सिस्टीमचा एक्सपिरियन्स कसा असतो?
गव्हर्मेंटचं जे काही पॉलिसी आहेत, म्हणजे त्याचं खरं उत्तर असं आहे की बाबा दिसायला फार छान दिसतात. म्हणजे रमाई घरकुल योजना असेल किंवा आत्ता जे आपले मंत्री आहेत, तर त्यांनी असं एक GR काढला की भटके विमुक्तांसाठी ही योजना आहे, त्यांची मुलं अशा अशा पद्धतीने शिकली तर फार पुढं जातील. तर हे जेवढं कागदावर चांगलं दिसतं आहे ना, आहे तसं उतरलं ना तर बाकीच्या NGOला कामच करायची गरज नाही आहे. माझा मुद्दा लक्षात येतो आहे का? गव्हर्मेंटनी ज्या काही पॉलिसी आखलेल्या आहेत त्या आहेत अशा खालीपर्यंत पोचल्या तर आपल्यासारख्या संस्थांना काम करायची गरज नाही. त्याचं एक उदाहरण देतो तुम्हाला मी. बावनकुळे साहेब तुम्हाला माहिती असतील, महाराष्ट्राचे मंत्री आहेत, कॅबिनेट मंत्री BJPचे. तर त्यांची एक लोकमतला बातमी आहे. माझी भाषा तुम्हाला समजते ना? तर ती बातमी अशी आहे, ती बातमी भटके विमुक्त जे कम्युनिटीतले लोक आहेत त्यांना घरी जाऊन राशन देणं, त्यांना घरी जाऊन डॉक्युमेंट देणं, त्यांना घरी जाऊन आधार कार्ड देणं, त्यांची मुलं शिक्षकांनी घरी जाऊन शाळेत नेणं. आता हे सगळं जर का सरकार करत असेल तर आपल्यासारख्या कार्यकर्त्याची काय गरज आहे? काहीच गरज नाही ना. दिसायला ते चांगलं दिसतंय, परंतु तुम्हाला माझा इतका वाईट अनुभव आहे. कलेक्टरकडे गेलं तर कलेक्टर म्हणतो की ही पोरं शाळेत जातात, आणि मी कलेक्टरना सांगतो अहो ही कागदपत्र त्यांची, पोरं शाळेत जात नाही, माझ्या संकट झाला. नाही म्हणले कागदावर दिसतंय नाही असं. तर अशी परिस्थिती आहे. पण दिसतं तसं नसतं जे आपण म्हणतो ना. आणि दुसरा मुद्दा असा आहे की ह्याच्यामध्ये मला जे जाणवतं की हा भारत आणि इंडियामधला संघर्ष आहे. म्हणजे इंडियामध्ये प्रचंड श्रीमंत लोक राहतात, मेट्रो सिटी आहे, चांगलं जीवनमान आहे, आणि भारतामध्ये अतिशय 2 वेळचं दयनीय अवस्था आहे जेवणाची. तर आपलं जे सगळ्यांचं काम आहे ते भारतासाठी आहे. आणि तर जी भारतातली लोक आहेत म्हणजे पारधी समुदाय आहे, तिरमल समुदाय आहे, गुबुगुबू जे तुम्हाला सिग्नलला दिसतं ना पोतराजवाले, ते भटके विमुक्तांमध्ये येतात, NT DNT. तर ही जी मंडळी आहेत मुळात या देशाचे नागरिक आहेत का नाही, इथूनच प्रश्न सुरुवात होतो आहे. तर या देशाचे नागरिक आपण कसं ठरवतो की सरकार म्हणतं की आम्ही म्हणजे कुठलंही, आपण काय कुठल्या एका सरकारच्या विरोधात नाही अजिबात, लोकांचं कल्याण झालं पाहिजे एवढंच आपलं म्हणणं आहे. पण आपण ज्या महासत्याच्या गप्पा मारतो ना की जग चंद्रावरती चाललं आपला देश, परंतु आम्हाला राशन कार्ड द्या आणि आम्ही ह्या देशाचे नागरिक आहोत, ह्याच्यासाठी आंदोलन करावं लागतात. तर म्हणजे किती दुर्दैव आहे सगळं. आणि राशन कार्डवरचं राशन घरी येतं आहे का नाही, माझं म्हणणं तुम्हाला समजतं आहे ना. रेशनिंग कार्डचं जे आपण रेशन कार्डचं दुकानमध्ये जातो तर ते तिथं गेल्यानंतर वेगळा भ्रष्टाचार असतो, ते काय आहे तसं मिळत नाही. पण रेशन कार्ड आल्यानंतर पॅन कार्ड येतं, पॅन कार्ड आल्यानंतर आधार कार्ड येतं, आधार कार्ड आल्यानंतर मुलगा शाळेत जातो. आणि मराठी शाळा इतकी बंद केलेली आहे, ज्या पद्धतीने आपण बघतो आहे, ज्या काही सरकारी शाळा आहेत त्या सगळ्या बंद केलेल्या आहेत, आणि त्याची दयनीय अवस्था आहे. तर जे काही आकडेवारी सांगितली जाते ते ग्राउंडवरती काय प्रत्यक्ष एवढी चांगली दिसत नाही आहे. त्याचं एक शेवटचं उदाहरण देतो मी. आपला सगळ्यांनाच देशावरती प्रेम आहे आपलं, म्हणजे माझं आहे, तुमचं आहे, आणि सरकारचं पण आहे. तर आपण जी देशभक्ती म्हणतो ना, आता दोन पद्धतीच्या देशभक्ती आहे. एक क्रिकेटची मॅच जिंकली तर लोक जरा त्यांची देशभक्ती जागी होती, बरोबर, परंतु एका दिवसापुरती, किंवा 15 ऑगस्ट आलं तरी देशभक्ती जागी होती. मी जी समोरची एक घटना अनुभवली आहे तर ती अशी होती, 35,000चं एका महिलेवरती कर्ज होतं. वय तिचं फक्त 23 वर्ष, म्हणजे लहान वयातच ती विधवा झाली, मुलगी झाली, म्हणजे मुलगी विधवा झाली. तिला 4 मुलं. कुठं राहिलं? कोथरूडला, मेट्रो सिटी. तर तिच्या नवऱ्याने आत्महत्या केली. का आत्महत्या केली? की मुलगा 15 ऑगस्टच्या दिवशी मला चांगले कपडे पाहिजे. आता कपडे मागितलं तर ते बापाला म्हणजे ते देता आलं नाही, त्याला ते लागलं ते. तर 35,000 तसं पाहिलं तर आपल्या दृष्टिकोनातनं जर कमी रक्कम आहे, आपल्या महिन्याचाच पगार असेल, पण त्यांच्या दृष्टिकोनातनं 35 लाख असू शकतो. मुलगा म्हणला मला चांगल्या हॉटेलला जायचं आहे जेवायला. तर ते त्याच्या बापाला लागलं की माझ्या मुलाला मी चांगले कपडे देऊ शकत नाही, आणि 15 ऑगस्टला देऊ शकत नाही, की त्याचे जे मित्र आहेत ते चांगले कपडे घालून 15 ऑगस्टला स्वातंत्र्याच्या दिवशी चांगलं दिसावं म्हणून. तर मुळात जे देशभक्त आपण जे म्हणतो ना, की त्याची हीच आपण थोडीशी व्याख्या ही केली पाहिजे, की कुठल्याही देशाला शिव्या देण्यापेक्षा किंवा कुठल्याही कम्युनिटीला शिव्या घालण्यापेक्षा आपल्या देशातले, भारत आणि इंडियातला जो संघर्ष तो संपून जाईल, आणि कुणी उपाशीपोटी झोपणार नाही आणि 35,000साठी आत्महत्या करणार नाही. यापेक्षा देशभक्ती काय असू शकते? आणि जे आपल्याला जे समाजमन घडवायचं आहे, म्हणजे आपण जे विचार करतो आहे, तर मला ते बुद्धांचं आणि महात्मा गांधींचं फार विचार महत्त्वाचे वाटतात, की सगळ्यांमध्ये संवेदनशीलता पाहिजे. तर ती संवेदनशीलता आपण ह्या गरिबांमध्ये पण बघितली पाहिजे. एक शेवटचा अनुभव सांगतो, नंतर तुम्ही बोला. एजेस मॉल आहे ना मागचा, एजेस मॉल, तिथे एक कल्याणी नावाची विद्यार्थिनी आहे आपली. तर एजेस मॉलचे जे श्रीमंत लोक आहेत, तर ते सिग्नलला जे भीक मागणारे आहे, आपली कल्याणी आहे, तिचे आईवडील आहेत, तर त्यांनी चोरी केली म्हणून त्यांनी त्या माणसाला तुरुंगात टाकलं. कायदा काय सांगतो की बेल मिळणं म्हणजे जामीन मिळणं हे संविधानिक त्याचा अधिकार आहे, घटनात्मक अधिकार आहे. आणि दुसऱ्या साईडला पोर्शोचं कार प्रकरण होतं, आणि कोर्ट काय सांगतं, निबंध लिहून जाई घरी तू, बरोबर ना? हे दोन फरक तुमच्या लक्षात येतो आहे ना? तर त्यांना जामीन नाही मिळाला, 4 वर्ष तुरुंगात तो माणूस अडकला. त्या मुलीला विचारलं, ज्या मुलीला मी शाळेत टाकलं, जी सिग्नलला भीक मागती कल्याणी, आता नाही मागत, ती शाळेत जाती, तिला विचारलं की तुला मोठ्या झाल्यावरती काय बनायचं आहे? तर तिने सांगितलं, मला वाटलं की काहीतरी सांगन, म्हणजे शाळेतले मुलं सांगतात पोलीस बनायचं, आर्मीत जायचं वगैरे वगैरे, किंवा डॉक्टर बनायचं. तर ती म्हणाली मला जज बनायचं, जज. तर मी जरा शॉकिंग झालो की एवढीशा लहान मुलीला न्यायाधीश, जज का बनावंसं वाटतं आहे. तर थोडंसं मला ते पण क्युरियोसिटी वाटली की बाबा तिला विचारावं असं का म्हणते. तर ती म्हणाली मी मला जज बनून काय बनणार. तिचं जे उत्तर आहे ना ते माझ्या कायम लक्षात राहिलेलं पण आहे, आणि नंतर माझ्या डोळ्यात पाणी आलं. ती म्हणली सिग्नलला भीक मागणं हे आमच्या हातात नाही, देवाने सगळ्यांना असमान बनवलं असलं तरी ते आमच्या हातात नाही. आता आम्ही काय करू, आम्ही सिग्नलला जन्माला आलो, पण ज्यावेळेस मी न्यायाधीश होईल, जे श्रीमंतवाले लोक आहेत ना, मॉलवाले काका, त्यांनी गुन्हा केला आणि गरिबांनी जरी गुन्हा केला तरी त्यांना समान न्याय देईन मी. ही तिची फिलॉसॉफी आहे. अजून म्हणजे हे मला वाटतं हे असं ग्राउंडवरती आहे वेगळे चित्र असं आहे. माझं म्हणणं कितपत समजतं मला माहीत नाही, परंतु
जरी मराठी ज्यांना समजत नसेल, if in case you do not understand Marathi, there will be a video of this put up, so you can look for the translation as well. In short, Sudarshan here, very difficult to share what he shared in short, but he was outlining the difference between India and Bharat, as he calls it. There's India, which all of us in a way inhabit, and Bharat, which all the participants, all the constituents that he works with have to live through, and he gave different examples of that. I want to bring us to a little bit of a close because we're about to end. We have about 10 minutes, 15 minutes for the audience to ask questions as well. But one thing this makes me think of is when I hear things like these, sometimes when I see what's happening in the world, sometimes when I see just how many things there are, it just makes me feel, what's the point of art? Like, why do I even do this? I almost feel guilty to enjoy participating in art. I'm curious if anyone, open question, popcorn style, if you have anything to comment on that, and then we can go to audience questions. And for the audience, in the meanwhile, you can load your questions. The way to ask a question is think of what is the shortest question you could ask to elicit the best answer that will be useful for everyone. Okay? Very little context, shortest question to elicit the best response for everyone. Back to the panel, popcorn style. Why do, I feel almost guilty to participate in any joyful activity when I think about all of these things. So how do I hold on to well-being and even joy in spaces like that?
I'll give you my response to it. So we recently did a study which it actually came out literally 2 weeks ago, and sort of connects back even a little bit to the discussion that we had around dance. So the way you respond to something like that is primarily because of empathy. Okay? And we now know that there are two kinds of empathy. There's what we call cognitive empathy, where you understand or have knowledge of what's happening, but you have the ability to know that this is happening to somebody else. And if I have to alleviate pain, then I have to understand it and not become part of it. So the other kind of empathy is called emotional empathy. Okay? And so it's in order to maintain well-being, and there is now enough research to show that, you need a balance between cognitive and emotional empathy. Either of them in excess, okay, could either make you somebody who doesn't care at all, or somebody who gets very anxious and gets completely overwhelmed and is unable to do anything. Okay? Something that happens to a lot of young people when you're scrolling through Instagram. You say, oh my God, this earthquake is happening, I can't even see this, and you put it away. Okay? But if you have the right balance of cognitive and emotional empathy, then that will certainly, you will understand that something bad is happening. You also realize as a single human being, you can't solve all problems of the world. Okay? But if you can take some action to alleviate that pain, either donate or participate and go and help, then you can actually cause a change in the world. And so you really want a balance of that cognitive and emotional empathy. Okay? And I think if you have that, then you are able to kind of veer close to well-being. There will be periods when you will go back and forth, but that's really what we find is the basis for resilience to quite an extent.
Wonderful. I almost connected with what Rukmini Akka was saying earlier about.
That's what I kept thinking of, but I didn't have a chance to talk about that.
Exactly. Great. Anybody else has any comments on that? And if anybody in the audience has a question, you can raise your hand and we'll come to you. Go for it.
एक मुद्दा राहूनच गेला सांगायचा. ज्या मुलांना शाळेत टाकलं ना आपण, तर तिथं फील्डवरती मी ज्या भागात काम करतो तिथं साधारणतः 5 नंतर कोण जात नाही, आणि काही मुलं ड्रॉपआउट झाली मुलांना जायची इच्छा आहे शाळेमध्ये, तर ड्रॉपआउट आहे ह्याच्यामुळं काही मुलं झाली. तर पालक जे आहेत, आई आणि वडील, दोघांची रात्रीची दारू उतरलेली नसते आणि मुलं म्हणतात की आईवडील उठत नाही म्हणून आमचंही उठणं होत नाही. आणि सकाळी आपण ज्यावेळेस दार वाजवायला जातो की तुमच्या मुलाला शाळेत घेऊन जावा, तर मुलगा म्हणतात की आम्ही तर काही दारू पित नाही, परंतु आईवडीलच आमच्या अंगावरती येतात, म्हणजे ते फेस करावं लागतं नाही की म्हणजे त्यांचं काउन्सिलिंग करावं लागतं वगैरे वगैरे. तर ही प्रॅक्टिकल परिस्थिती. आणि 260 मुलांना दांडेकर पुलाची इथं राष्ट्रसेवा दल साने गुरुजी शाळा आहे, ताई आल्या होत्या, तर त्या शाळेमध्ये नेलं. त्या शाळेमध्ये नेल्यानंतर ते का कुठल्या तरी नवीन जगात आले आणि शाळेचं पहिल्यांदा दार त्यांनी पाहिलं. तर एक वेगळ्या विश्वात ते आल्यानंतर ते म्हणले की दादा आम्हाला छान वाटतं. छान का वाटतं की त्यांना ग्राउंड आहे, म्हणजे ग्राउंड छान खेळायला मिळतं. ज्या भागात राहतात तिथं ग्राउंड नाही, खेळणी नाही, झोपडपट्टी आहे. आणि मानसिक आरोग्याचा प्रश्न इतक्यासाठी महत्त्वाचा आहे की संजनाताई माझ्या कार्यक्षेत्रामध्ये आल्या होत्या. मुलांचा खेळ घेतला त्यांनी आणि मुलांचा खेळ 2, 4, 5, 6 काही खेळ घेतल्यानंतर जी मुलं, व्हाईटनर नावाचं एक व्यसन आहे, तुम्हाला माहिती आहे का व्हाईटनर? थोडंसं गांजा बिंजा पण असतो, विमल खात्यात, गोवा गुटखा. तर आपली काही वस्तीतली मुलं ते पण व्यसन करतात, कारण आजूबाजूचं वातावरण ते तसंच आहे. तर मानसिक आरोग्याच्या दृष्टिकोनातनं संजनाताईंनी जर का खेळ घेतला नसता तर मुलांचं व्यसनाधीनचं प्रमाण जास्त वाढलं असतं. आणि मानसिक आरोग्य हा विषय फार महत्त्वाचा आहे माझ्यासारख्या कार्यकर्त्याला वाटतं. आणि जर का आपण याच्यावरती बोललं नाही, गरिबावरती म्हणजे जे अतिशय वंचित घटकातली जी मुलं आहेत, पालक आहेत, त्यांच्याशी बोललं नाही तर या देशात सगळ्यात जास्त आत्महत्या वाढतील असं दिसतंय. कारण दुःख कुठंतरी व्यक्त करायला जागा पाहिजे ना. तर संजनाताई, थँक्यू.
Sudarshan referenced an activity intervention that Sanjana and the team at Arisa did, and how all the kids, they really enjoyed it. It was art based, and in a way it answers my earlier question of how do we do that. And even in spaces like these, kids do find value in it, find joy in it. Wonderful. Perhaps to close this, I'll ask a question that I hope everybody will feel a sense of connection to. For everyone here, what is your individual practice of well-being? If you'd like to share, not in your professional context, but in your personal context, what is your own way of being well? तुमच्या पर्सनल लाईफमध्ये तुम्ही स्वतःची काळजी कशी घेता? तुम्ही स्वतः वेलबिंग कसं प्रॅक्टिस करता? प्रोफेशनल याच्यामध्ये नाही, दुसऱ्यांसाठी नाही, स्वतःसाठी. अँड we'll have all of you share, and perhaps that gives us some ideas as well, whoever wants to, and we'll end with that.
पर्सनल लाईफमध्ये तुम्ही विचारलं की स्वतःची काळजी कसं घेता, म्हणजे आता स्वतःचे प्रश्न गळून पडलेत माझे, म्हणजे वैयक्तिकरित्या. त्याचं कारण असं आहे की ज्यावेळेस इतरांचं आपल्याला दुःख समजायला लागतं त्यावेळेस स्वतःचे प्रश्न राहतच नाही. म्हणजे फार गरजा राहत नाही, नाही का, फार लाईफस्टाईल जगावं असं वाटत नाही. कारण रोज कम्युनिटीमध्ये इतकं बघतोय ना, रोज भयंकर नवीन नवीन प्रश्न येतात. तर म्हणजे बुद्ध जे सांगतात की इतरांचं दुःख समजलं पाहिजे, त्याच्यामुळे स्वतःचं दुःख फार काय वाटत नाही मला.
ओके, थँक्यू.
आणि त्यातच मला असं वाटतं की हॅपी आहे, एकदम आनंदी आहे. म्हणजे फील्डवरनं घरी आलं की ती ज्यावेळेस मी फील्डवरनं घरी येतो त्यावेळेस मला असं वाटतं की मी माझी काळजी घेतली, कारण कुणाचं तरी दुःख आपण शेअरिंग केलेलं आहे, नाही का.
Okay, thank you. It reminds me of what Mr. Rogers, who's one of my heroes, he used to run a program for kids. He used to say, whenever there's points of pain, look for the helpers, because there are always helpers, and that gives you joy and that gives you something to hold on to as well, which is what Sudarshan seems to say as well. He's one of the helpers that I'm sure a lot of people look at and find some sense of calmness in. Santa?
I think two things. One is like through the years, I think, and I'm still learning this, is learning which fights to pick, because I don't have control over everything, and the amount of exposure we have. I think just learning that it's okay to not be informed immediately. I can always go back to it if I'm overwhelmed. And that there are certain things that I as an individual can't do, and I need to be well enough to be able to fight it at some point. So I need to first take care of myself before trying to fight it. So I think like the community that I have, or like, you know, some individual practices, it could be, and it could just be like withdrawing from social media for some time, does help in stabilizing myself enough to then think of, okay, what next? Like, is this something that I can fight? Is this something like, you know, where I can look for other helpers? Is this something that I can connect someone else to for help in that way? And second time is, and I think this is more of a personal thing, is that I love my alone time, and I make sure that I have that alone time to do anything. It could be like drawing, it could be reading, it could just be like sitting and doing nothing. But giving myself that alone time to recharge from everything, and then go back either professionally, personally, whatever it is. And I think those are the two things that I am learning, and I think they help for me.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Nandini?
I think I have learned to prioritize self-compassion. At the end of the day, I don't beat myself up for all the things I didn't do, but I applaud myself for the things that I did do. And that keeps me sane and helps me go to bed and get a good night's sleep.
Thank you. Dr. Anjan?
For me, exercise. You know, the dancers all know this, but for those of us who can move but don't dance, just exercise. It's my routine in the morning. Every morning I go to the gym, and if I miss that for some time, I get cranky, I get restless, I'm not very pleasant to be around. And then the other, I mean, I certainly need time to myself, absolutely. But the other, in a positive sense, I love food, and which is why it's such a thrill to be in India. So, you know, but I also like to cook. And cooking is one of those things where you have to slow down, right? You know, it's an aesthetic experience, it's a creative experience, you know, it's sort of the alchemy of why is it these combinations of spices and textures create this thing, right? It's just so, and unlike if you're a researcher where you have an idea, it might be 3 years before you see the outcome. It's right there, and then you get to enjoy it. So cooking for me is a great way of experiencing well-being.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yes, let's give them a round of applause. And as we close this panel,
Can I interrupt you there? How do you maintain your well-being?
I talk to kids all the time. I think there's a lot of joy to be found in how kids find joy. There's small things in everyday life that a child gets excited about. Being in the company of kids talking about what they get excited about helps you like look at everything properly as well. Now, Kohinoor has a little kid, and sometimes if you take her and walk around, you'll see that she's in baby mode, and that's something that I try and follow. Baby mode is you go without a specific agenda and you start observing small things in everyday life. Maybe the crevices on the little bark of the tree there, maybe the pattern that the stones below you make, which are things that kids would watch. And for me, that gives me a lot of joy. It also keeps me well. And something that I hear from all of you and from talking to different people is the title of this panel is quite apt. It is holding well-being, which almost makes me feel that well-being isn't a state to achieve or isn't a tick mark to have. It's a practice that you keep holding. And sometimes you hold it with like tentative hands and it kind of falls through, but it's okay. You can hold it again. And you can hold it for yourself. You can hold it for others, like many of you do, like many of the people here in the audience do. So my invitation for everyone as we close this panel is this. Like we asked here, what is your personal way of keeping well? As you go home today, maybe somebody that you meet here can spark some ideas in your mind as well. So maybe ask them, how do you hold well-being? And with that, please join me in thanking the wonderful panel that we had. I hope this was as entertaining on that side of the panel as it was insightful on this end. And thank you once again to all the wonderful panelists that we have. Thank you.